G'day traders, welcome to wrap up of Monday the 9th of July. So we've got a full week of trading this week. Obviously last week was a little bit disjointed. In fact we had 2 days off right in the middle of the week. So an interesting one as far as I think that the volume and the volatility was a little bit off, a little bit skewy, just because traders were tending to probably have a bit of a week off. So hopefully get back to a little bit of normal circumstances this week. The thing to note about from here on in, and is that traders will start to have some time off. July, August, typically in the US summer is time when these traders do tend to have some time off, and as a result, volume can start to drop. There is talk that because of the current economic situation around the world, that it shouldn't drop too much because it's so unstable. People are tending to hang around and not so much go on their break, so volume could stay a little bit higher. But I did notice today volume was down just a touch, and we're getting tighter ranges, but that just could be an indication of where we are in the markets as well. So I wouldn't look too much into it, and hopefully we can keep on cruising through July and August and have no problems. But in saying that, today's range, even though it's a little bit tighter, there's still plenty of opportunities. So here we are on the daily chart. We've got this line here around about 1343, 1344. That seems to be acting as a little bit of a support at the moment there. So we've got this buyer's trend heading up. So definitely some weight for the buyers on the buyer's side, but around this level here we're looking for it to hold and potentially push higher. If this doesn't want to hold, it might come down to this next support level. So I'll leave these lines in. They're all the support and resistance areas, but expecting this market to kind of grip and hold and potentially head back to its highs. So here we are on the 5-minute chart. Now what happened here is the market opened up and started to head higher, then all of a sudden it swung round and started coming back to the downside. This little bit of a swing low here in the pre-market was an interesting area. It was a good one to gauge the markets on and check what all the other markets were doing. So as we came down, we applied a lot of pressure to us, and a lot of the other markets were breaking really quite strongly to the downside. So I thought there was an early opportunity to look at potentially selling early and getting on this downtrend. It's what I call a bit of a directional breakout trade for myself, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And the fact watching other markets is really an indication of what it's going to do. Quite often it comes down here if it's going to bounce and possibly go back into range or head the other way. The other markets, some of them will sit a lot higher, whereas this one here, all the other markets were there or pushing right through that area already. I think it was the Dow Jones that was well and truly pushing through and sitting a lot lower, and as a result all the markets then got momentum and power to push through. So as far as just a relationship between these buyers and sellers, and we'll get into a bit more detail on the 1-minute chart, but obviously these markets have pushed down lower. This is where we started to hold and turn around back to the upside. So this is a bit of a level that we talked about on the daily, anywhere through this bit of a 2-point range here, expecting to hold and push higher. So as it started coming back up here, it looked like it was more than just some sort of retracement. It looked like the market was actually trying to start to form a new trend, and as soon as it started getting up above this sort of 45 region here, showed a fair bit of strength to the buyers, and looked like these markets was possibly heading back to the highs here. That soon was found not to be the case. As this market's coming back here, expected a bit of support and maybe to hold and push higher from there, but all the other markets started breaking through that point and we started heading back to the lows where they started pushing through the lows. The interesting area about this, but all the markets were a little bit disjointed today. As we pushed lower here, the ES and the Dow Jones, they pushed lower and made new lows, but the Russell and the Nasdaq, if you go back and have a look over them, that's why the other markets are so interesting. This particular swing low here was actually sitting higher than this swing low. So the Russell, for example, came down here and then popped up and started pushing higher. So even early on, even though we're making new lows, it became quite evident that maybe the buyers were coming back and having another go. From there, they pushed up to this this 45 region again, came back, obviously didn't have the power to go lower, and then from there again started heading back to the highs, and this time looked like it wanted to go back and make a higher highs, but again this tight range started to stick by, and a bit like similar to this situation as it's came back here, expecting these sort of levels to hold, but when it drifted and really hung around this 45-50 area, it was a strong support level in the market. The fact it didn't bounce off that straight away gave concern for these buyers. when you think about the markets, what happens is around these strong support resistance levels, that's where the most volume lies. So an area like this where we've got up above it, we come back and test it. If there's buyers there, they should really grab that area and start to take off. The fact that it hung around this area here gives concern for the downside. The more it hangs around, the more likely it's to, as soon as it pops down, it's to keep on going for a bit. And that's the case. The pressure was built on the downside. There was just no buyers there to take that level there, which normally could be a bit of a buyer's area, but wasn't the case, and we pushed lower from there. Pushing back up here, so what happened is this market then held. You can see a real good support line here through 52.50. So this market's held and pushed higher. So as far as this area here, it's right in the middle of the range. It's one that you could really put a case either side to sell or buy from. Personally, preferred as more of a buy. In fact, this area was holding, didn't push low. All the other markets were holding as well. Signaled that I just felt there's pressure on the upside, and they're eventually going to hold and push high, and this is exactly what they did. And from there, they eventually went and made new highs, which they were threatening to do all day long. Sorry, just to go back to, I didn't mention too much about this 5-minute sell here. So this area here, it's a similar area to this one where it could be a bit of a case for both sides. So I think it's the opposite version of this one. So this one here, like I said, it held down here, started pushing up. It was approaching some significant levels and had the power to come back and then eventually push through. So I certainly like the upside there. This one here, what we talked about earlier, it was a difficult one because this market started pushing up and breaking up through resistance levels. It looked like then the market had the power to potentially hold somewhere and push higher. So really looking for some sort of buying opportunity. But then all of a sudden the market started falling and putting a lot of pressure on the downside. So even though here now it's not technically a buy, it's definitely a seller's area. It was one that was a little bit more difficult to read just because not long ago the markets were looking at holding and buying. But I guess that's the thing about trading. The market can change really quite quickly. There was probably a small section here where the buyers started to gain control, but that was quickly stamped out. You can see in this overall area, it was a seller's area. So in hindsight, definitely more of a sell. Moving on to the 1-minute chart. So here's this area to the downside. That's this first break to the downside where all the other markets were applying pressure. So the way I read this is it's tough. Like for example, to buy on to the upside here. It just wasn't really the case. If you look at the other markets, there was no one really pushing through and breaking sort of this little bit of a swing high here. Okay, it just didn't look like it was going to push through. But then also when the market started turning, all the other markets were on the downside, and you got something to gauge the markets on. So this bit of a pivot point here, and they're all looking to bust through that. And it's a percentage area that it's most likely to go lower from. You can see that the market's come back a few times and kind of tried to test this bit of a low area here, and the market kept on holding it down. So it was really confirming that the sellers are around to start off with, and looked like they were wanting to push lower. Then we started turning around and pushing back to the upside here. This sort of as a PowerPoint, maybe this had some options because it's kind of one where these levels here could hold and push the markets back down. But it's kind of like the markets had their chance to go lower, then they're popping back up, and this time they're able to push through it. All the other markets are starting to gain some momentum as well. So for that reason, I'd be very careful with that sort of PowerPoint. It's one that looked like the market pop up through. From there, expected it to go a little bit higher, and then come back and use this area as a support level. So what ideally you'd like to see is it go up, and then have a PowerPoint maybe sitting around this level here, and use that to buy and push higher from. But the buy side of the markets didn't get that momentum that they needed, and as a result, there's no PowerPoint there to hold and support the markets to push higher from. From there, the markets then turned back around to the downside. So this particular area here, pushing down lower. This is where the other markets, the Russell and the Nasdaq, started to form again on the upside. They weren't placing any sort of pressure on the downside, so difficult to really go with the sellers through here. It just didn't look like they were likely to get a follow through, which is what is the case. Even though they went down, made a new low, they quickly came back to the upside here. This area around here, you can see just by looking at it, hopefully you guys can see, it's a bit of a holding formation. So when we talk about the other markets not making lower lows, that's a real sign for the upside. Then you see it sort of hold like this, come up, come back, and at no stage are they making lower lows, and they're putting a lot of pressure on this 4450 area, and eventually it's pushed through. So something like this kind of power fade, when you see that sort of thing, so from a short-term perspective, you're seeing these holding formations on the 1 minute chart. From a slightly longer perspective, as in over the last couple of hours, you've seen the other markets failing to make lower lows. So that all indicates a build to the upside and pressure to the upside, and eventually there is able to go a little bit higher. From there, again, it's come back. So we're getting into the afternoon session now. So this section through here, this was a little bit of for me, just a bit of a disjointed section of the market, just unsure what it wanted to do. All of a sudden, they're putting pressure on the upside for a second time. Then they were coming back again, and really expected the markets to go and push higher. But this downside was short-lived, and then again it started pushing up and breaking through. And this particular power fade here, if you look at it, so there would have been one here which would have failed, and it's come back. It's gone a second time. This one has eventually worked, but this was the area, if you look at it on the 5 minute chart, this area here putting pressure on. So a couple of times they've tried to break through this 47 region, and eventually they've done it right, fairly late in the afternoon. So that's a wrap up for, what is it, Monday? And we'll speak to you guys Tuesday.